The room went still the moment Maya laughed. It wasn't a polite laugh. It wasn't a nervous laugh. It was sharp, loud, and cutting. The kind of laugh meant to slice someone open. Grandpa Harold had just pulled out Grandma Evelyn's chair at the dining table and said with a warm smile, "Here you go, my lady." And Maya exploded. "Oh my God, Grandpa," she chuckled, shaking her head. Her green-dyed bangs fell over her eyes as she leaned back in her chair. "My lady? Seriously? What is this, the 1800s? The rest of the family froze mid-motion. Forks paused. Glasses hovered halfway to lips. Evelyn's smile faltered, just barely, like a candle caught in a sudden breeze. Harold straightened slowly, his hand still resting on the back of her chair. His eyes shifted to Maya, not angry, not offended, just observing. But Maya saw none of it. She smirked and kept going. "You know that kind of language is outdated, right? It's literally the definition of patriarchal nonsense. It sounds like you think Grandma belongs to you." "Maya," her father muttered under his breath, a warning she ignored. She scoffed again. "Honestly, Grandpa, I can't believe you still talk like that." "My lady? Come on. Women aren't porcelain dolls, and Grandma doesn't need some man pulling out her chair like she's helpless." Evelyn lowered her gaze, her fingers tightening around her napkin. Still, Harold said nothing. He simply walked around the table, took his seat, and folded his hands calmly. But the stillness in him felt deliberate, heavy, like a quiet storm waiting for the right moment. Maya rolled her eyes dramatically. "You should really rethink how you speak to women. It's embarrassing." Silence. A thick, suffocating silence. Everyone at the table stared at their plates, their hands, the walls, anywhere but at Maya. And then, finally, Harold lifted his eyes. His voice was gentle, steady, but carried an indescribable gravity. "I call her my lady," he said softly, "because there was a time she couldn't remember her own name, but she still remembered mine." Maya's breath caught. The fork slipped from her fingers. Evelyn closed her eyes. And the room, once frozen in awkwardness, now froze in something entirely different. Shock, pain, and a truth deeper than any argument Maya had ever thrown. Harold didn't raise his voice. He didn't defend himself with anger. He defended Evelyn with love. And in a single sentence, he silenced the entire world around them. Maya stared at her grandfather, her lips parted but no sound coming out. The confidence she wore like armor slipped, not shattered but cracked just enough for something else to seep through. Evelyn reached for Harold's hand beneath the table. He took it gently, as though it were something fragile he'd spent a lifetime protecting. Maya blinked rapidly. What do you mean? She couldn't remember her own name. Harold didn't rush. He never rushed. He took a slow breath, his thumb brushing Evelyn's knuckles, steady and reassuring. "It was 12 years ago," he said softly. "After the accident." Evelyn lowered her gaze, a shadow passing through her eyes. Maya's heart stuttered. She had heard vague mentions of an accident, but it was always whispered, tucked away, softened by time. No one had ever told her what actually happened. Harold's voice was quiet, but every word fell heavy. "Your grandmother woke up in a hospital bed, and for 2 days, she didn't remember who she was." Maya's stomach twisted. She didn't know her name. She didn't know the year. Didn't know why she was there. His voice trembled just slightly. "But when I spoke to her, she looked at me and said, 'You, I know you.'" Evelyn squeezed his hand, tears welling behind her lashes. Harold continued, the memory etched into his tone. "Every nurse in that room told me it meant something, that sometimes the heart remembers what the mind forgets." Maya swallowed hard, her earlier smugness evaporating with every second. "So yes," Harold said gently, meeting Maya's eyes, "I call her my lady, not because she belongs to me, but because she found her way back to herself through me." The room felt small, intimate, pulsing with emotion Maya wasn't prepared for. Harold's next words were softer still, almost a whisper. And I pull out her chair because for months afterward her balance wasn't steady. She'd get dizzy. Her legs would shake. His eyes softened. So I held her arm, guided her, made sure she felt safe. He paused. I suppose the habit stayed with me. Evelyn let out a shaky breath, brushing away a tear before it fell. It wasn't weakness, she murmured. It was recovery, and he never once made me feel ashamed. Maya's throat constricted. Her chest, once puffed with righteous indignation, now felt hollow, painfully hollow, as if all the wind had been knocked out of her. She looked at her grandparents, really looked at them. The quiet devotion in Harold's eyes, the gratitude in Evelyn's trembling smile, the story beneath a single gesture she had mocked. She felt suddenly, unbearably small. I didn't know, she whispered, voice thin. Harold offered her a kind smile. You didn't ask. And those 3 words, simple, calm, unaccusing, hit her harder than any argument ever had. Maya's face flushed hot, her earlier confidence shrinking into something tight and uncomfortable. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, unsure how to even begin repairing what she had just broken. Nobody told me, she managed. Evelyn gave a gentle, bittersweet smile. We didn't want you to carry it. You were just a kid. Harold nodded. And after a while, we learned to live with the parts of that story we kept private. Not everything needs to be spoken to be understood. Maya swallowed hard, guilt curling like smoke around her thoughts. I wasn't trying to be cruel. I know, Harold said, but intention isn't the same as impact. Those words landed with precision, not sharp, but true. Maya lowered her gaze, replaying the moment she had laughed, loud and dismissive, without even looking at Evelyn's face. I thought, Maya began, staring at her hands. I thought I was standing up for Grandma, for women, for equality. Evelyn reached across the table, her touch light but warm against Maya's wrist. Sweetheart, protecting women is noble, but sometimes real protection starts with listening. Maya's breath caught. Evelyn continued softly. Before you assume a woman is oppressed, ask her what her life means to her. Harold squeezed Evelyn's hand. Your grandmother is the strongest woman I know. I've only ever called her my lady because she earned that place in my heart long before the world tried to take everything from her. Maya looked at them, really looked at them, and for the first time noticed the subtle tremor in Evelyn's fingers, the way Harold angled his chair just slightly toward hers as though keeping watch. These were not signs of dominance or submission. They were signs of a bond that had survived storms she couldn't imagine. Maya blinked back a burning behind her eyes. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I didn't know the meaning behind it. You couldn't have, Harold replied gently, but assumptions can bruise more deeply than questions. That sentence hit her harder than the rest. Her entire worldview had been built on fighting the wrongs she saw, but she had never considered that sometimes she might be swinging before seeing the target clearly. Evelyn touched her cheek with a soft, trembling thumb. You have a brave heart, Maya, but bravery without humility can cause harm. Maya closed her eyes, her breath shaking. I don't want to harm anyone, especially not you. Evelyn smiled. Then learn our story, not the version you assumed. Maya nodded slowly. I want to. I really do. Harold leaned forward, his eyes warm with forgiveness, older than her lifetime. Then let me tell you how my lady saved my life long before I ever saved hers. The room seemed to pull in closer, the air thick with unspoken history, and Maya, for the first time, felt ready to listen instead of speak. Harold settled back in his chair, the weight of years resting gently in his posture. The room grew quiet, not tense like before, but expectant, as if everyone sensed something important was about to unfold. Even the clinking of silverware seemed to pause. Maya wiped her palms on her jeans, her throat tight. Grandpa, what do you mean she saved your life? Harold glanced at Evelyn, who gave him a tiny nod. Permission, encouragement, love all intertwined. Only then did he begin. It was long before her accident, he said softly, before you were born, before your mother was even married. His eyes drifted somewhere distant. I was not the man you know today. Maya frowned. What do you mean? Harold swallowed, his voice steady but low. I came home from deployment a different man, angry, lost, startled by loud noises, unable to sleep, unable to speak about what I'd seen. Back then, nobody called it trauma. They called it getting over it, and I couldn't. Evelyn reached over and placed a hand over his. He didn't look at her, but Maya saw the way his shoulders eased the moment he felt her touch. I pushed people away, he continued, drifted from everyone. I didn't want to feel anything. Didn't want to live much either. Maya's breath caught. She had never heard this, never even imagined it. But your grandmother, Harold said, his voice warming. She saw through the anger, through the silence, through everything ugly I was carrying. Evelyn's eyes glistened, but she stayed quiet. She sat with me on nights I paced the hall for hours. She grabbed my hand during the worst moments and refused to let me disappear into myself. She reminded me I was worth saving even when I didn't believe it. Harold paused, his gaze softening at the memory. One night, when I was at my lowest, she put her hand on my face and said, Harold, if you fall, I fall with you, and I don't intend to fall. Evelyn smiled faintly. I meant every word. Maya felt a lump forming in her throat. That, Harold said, turning back to Maya, was the moment I decided she would never walk a step alone if I could help it. I promised myself I would honor her strength for the rest of my days. He took a shaky breath. So when she lost her memory years later, when she lost her balance, when she lost pieces of herself, his voice thickened. It was my turn to carry her. Evelyn squeezed his hand, her lip trembling. You carried more than you should have. Harold smiled at her with a gentleness that made Maya's chest tighten. I carried what you once carried for me. Silence settled over the table, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was reverent. Maya felt something inside her collapse and rebuild at the same time. She whispered, I had no idea. Harold nodded. You saw a gesture and judged it, but you didn't see the promise behind it. Maya's eyes filled. I thought my lady was old-fashioned, demeaning. I thought you were calling Grandma something. Her voice cracked. Something small. Harold shook his head slowly, his gaze deep and unwavering. I call her my lady because she is the reason I'm still here. Because she treated me with dignity when I had none left. Because she taught me what love looks like when it's hard. He paused. And because that woman has more strength in her than any title could ever capture. Evelyn's face softened into a tearful smile. Maya couldn't speak, could barely breathe. Everything she thought she understood about strength, oppression, patriarchy, all of it was rearranging itself in her mind, quietly but irreversibly. Finally, she whispered, Grandma, I'm so sorry. I mocked something I didn't even try to understand. Evelyn shook her head gently. Understanding comes from listening, sweetheart. And now you're listening. Harold reached across the table, his voice warm but firm. Before you fight a battle, Maya, make sure you know which side the love is standing on. And for the first time, Maya felt her certainty tremble. Not from weakness, but from awakening. Maya sat back in her chair, overwhelmed, the world around her blurring just slightly as the weight of everything she had misunderstood settled heavily inside her. She had come into this lunch ready to correct, critique, educate. She had been so sure of her role, so certain she was the only one at the table who truly understood strength and oppression. But now she felt like a child who had burst into a library and started shouting before realizing she couldn't even read the language around her. Evelyn dabbed the corner of her eye with a napkin, smiling through the softness of old wounds resurfacing. Harold always said the world expected him to be the strong one, she murmured. But between us, it was never a question who the solid ground really was. Harold chuckled, low and warm. Your grandmother once stood between me and a full-blown panic attack just by holding my hand. Maya looked at her grandmother's small, delicate fingers, fingers she had once dismissed as fragile. But now she understood. Those hands had held together the pieces of a man broken by things she couldn't imagine. "Grandma," Maya whispered, voice trembling. "I didn't know. I didn't know any of this." Evelyn's smile didn't fade. If anything, it grew gentler. "We didn't tell you because we didn't want our past pain to shape your future. You deserve to grow without carrying our shadows." Harold nodded. "You only saw the surface, and what's on the surface isn't always the truth." Maya swallowed, shame mixing with something deeper. Humility, maybe. Growth. "I thought calling her my lady was treating her like she was beneath you, like you owned her." Harold shook his head slowly. "No, sweetheart. It's how I honor her. A reminder, every day, of the woman who pulled me out of darkness." Evelyn touched her heart. "And I call him my gentleman. But I suppose you've never heard that part." Maya blinked. "You do?" Evelyn laughed softly. "Oh yes, I have for 40 years, but I only say it when it's just us. It's special that way." Maya's cheeks warmed. Her assumptions suddenly felt painfully, embarrassingly childish. "I guess I saw everything through the lens of what I thought was right for women," she admitted. "And I never stopped to think that maybe what's empowering for one woman isn't the same for another." Harold smiled. "That's the real truth, Maya. Liberation isn't one size fits all." Evelyn squeezed her hand gently. "Empowerment comes in many forms. Mine was loving a man who needed help healing. His was loving me back to myself." Maya's eyes stung. She looked down at the tablecloth, tracing a pattern with her finger. "I've been so loud about defending women that I didn't even hear my own grandmother's story." Harold leaned forward, voice soft but firm. "A good advocate listens before speaking." Maya nodded slowly. "I want to be better. I want to understand instead of assuming." Evelyn smiled with pride. "Then you're already halfway there." Silence settled again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was comforting. Healing. Finally, Maya looked at both of them and whispered, Can you tell me more about what happened? I want to understand everything." Harold squeezed Evelyn's hand. Evelyn nodded softly. "Maya," she said, her voice tender but strong, "there's a lot you don't know about the years after my accident, and if you're ready, we'll tell you the truth of what we survived. Together." Maya lifted her eyes, steady and sincere. "I'm ready." Evelyn took a slow breath, bracing herself not out of fear, but out of respect for the memories she was about to reopen. Harold's thumb rubbed soothing circles over the back of her hand, a gesture so natural, so practiced, it was clear he'd done it 1,000 times before. "Maya," Evelyn began softly. "After the accident, the hardest part wasn't the pain. It was the confusion." Maya leaned forward, hanging on to every word. "I would wake up in our own home and feel like I was in the wrong house. I would look at photos and not recognize the face smiling back at me. I couldn't remember basic things, my birthday, my favorite song, whether I'd eaten. It was like trying to hold water in my hands." Her voice trembled on the last sentence, but she didn't look away. Harold's expression tightened with quiet ache. "And some days she'd forget we were married. Once she even asked me if I was a doctor." Evelyn laughed sadly. "I asked him what his name was. Imagine that, asking the love of your life who he is." Maya's chest constricted. "Grandma." "But," Evelyn continued, turning to Harold with eyes full of warmth, "every single morning he introduced himself to me with a smile. 'I'm Harold,' he'd say, 'and you're my lady.'" Harold shrugged gently. "It made you smile, even when nothing else did." Maya felt tears threatening. She blinked hard to keep them from falling. "And then," Evelyn said, voice growing steadier, "the balance issue started. I couldn't stand without swaying. My legs shook. I fell twice in the kitchen, once hard enough to bruise my ribs. So Harold started pulling out my chair, guiding me, holding me when I walked." She paused, her eyes meeting Maya's with soft intensity. "It wasn't about weakness. It was about safety, about dignity. about feeling cared for when I had forgotten how to care for myself. Harold leaned in, voice low. I would have carried her everywhere if I needed to, gladly. Maya pressed a hand against her chest as if steadying herself. The image of her grandparents, one recovering, the other devoted, swelled inside her with overwhelming clarity. Grandma Evelyn wasn't small, she wasn't fragile, she wasn't oppressed, she was a survivor. And Grandpa Harold wasn't patronizing, he wasn't controlling, he wasn't antiquated. He was honoring the woman who saved him long before he ever saved her, Maya whispered, her voice breaking. I thought I understood what strength looked like, but I didn't. Evelyn reached across the table, her hand warm on Maya's trembling fingers. Strength isn't always loud, sweetheart. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's choosing to hold on when everything inside you is slipping away. And love, Harold added softly, is learning what someone needs, not what you think they should need. The words pierced Maya's heart with gentle truth. Evelyn gave her a tender smile. You weren't wrong to question things, Maya. You just questioned without understanding, and that's something you can change. Maya nodded, wiping her cheeks. I want to. I swear I want to. Harold leaned back slightly, studying her with a kind but sincere expression. Then start by knowing this. Every gesture has a story. Every habit has a history. Before you judge a moment, ask for the chapter that came before it. Maya let out a shaky breath. I'm sorry for laughing, for assuming, for everything. Evelyn squeezed her hand. You are growing, not failing. Harold smiled softly. And that is enough. Maya felt her heart settle into something new. Humility wrapped in understanding. She glanced at her grandparents, their intertwined hands, their quiet resilience, their extraordinary story hidden beneath ordinary moments. For the first time in her life, she understood. Some traditions weren't cages, some gestures weren't chains, some words weren't relics. Sometimes they were love. Maya sat in thoughtful silence, her grandparents' intertwined hands resting gently between them like a living symbol of everything she had misunderstood. She wiped her cheeks again, though the tears hadn't fully stopped. Every new detail reshaped her understanding, softening edges she once thought were sharp truths. After a moment, Harold cleared his throat softly. There's something else you should know, Maya. Something I've never said out loud to anyone but Evelyn. Evelyn looked at him with surprise, then with a tender nod, encouraging him to continue. Harold took a slow breath. After the accident, when she couldn't remember her name, she remembered mine. He glanced at Evelyn, eyes glistening. That was a blessing. But what you don't know is that 6 months earlier, I couldn't remember hers. Maya blinked, stunned. What? Why? Harold's jaw tightened with quiet shame. I had a severe episode, a trauma relapse. It hit me harder than any before. I woke up one morning and my mind felt like fog, like someone had switched off half the lights. He paused. I knew her face, I knew her warmth, but her name, it was gone. Evelyn gently rubbed his arm. Only for a few minutes, dear. Minutes that felt like a lifetime, Harold murmured. I cried harder that day than I ever cried in combat. Because forgetting her felt like losing everything that kept me human. Maya's throat closed. Grandpa, Evelyn smiled sadly. And do you know what he did next? He asked me to introduce myself. Her eyes softened. So I said, I'm Evelyn, and you're my gentleman. Harold chuckled softly. I wrote her name on my palm that day, kept it there for hours. He lifted his hand as if seeing the memory etched into the skin. I promised myself that if my mind ever betrayed me again, my heart wouldn't. Maya felt something inside her break in the gentlest way. And then, Evelyn continued, when it was my turn to forget, I looked at him, confused, frightened, lost. But he didn't panic. He didn't cry. He simply held my hand and said, Hello, my lady. I'm Harold. A tear rolled down her cheek, and just like that, I wasn't afraid anymore. Harold squeezed her hand, She remembered my voice before her own name. So yes. He looked directly at Maya. I call her my lady, because it brought her back to me once, because it reminds both of us that love can survive even when memory cannot. Maya couldn't hold back her tears this time. The world she had built, one where affection was dangerous, tradition oppressive, gentleness suspicious, was crumbling in the presence of a truth she had never made room for. Love was more complex than her ideology. People were more layered than her assumptions. And her grandparents were far stronger than she had ever imagined. I was so wrong, she whispered, voice trembling. I thought I was standing up for Grandma, but I didn't even know her story. I didn't know your story. Evelyn reached for her. Sweetheart, you fought for women the way you thought was right. There is no shame in that. But now, you're learning to fight with understanding. Harold nodded. Feminism is strongest when it listens, not when it assumes. Maya let out a shaky breath. I should have listened to you both. I should have asked. I should have... No, Evelyn interrupted softly but firmly. You should forgive yourself now. Maya looked up, startled. Forgive myself? Evelyn smiled. Growth isn't possible if you're too busy punishing yourself. Maya wiped her face again, breathing shakily. She wasn't used to soft truths. She wasn't used to people meeting her fire with tenderness. She wasn't used to the idea that strength could be quiet and still be real. Grandma, Maya whispered, can you tell me something? Of course, dear. When Grandpa calls you my lady, how does it make you feel? Evelyn's expression warmed into something radiant and deeply sincere. It makes me feel seen. Maya's breath caught. Evelyn continued, voice delicate but certain. It reminds me that I mattered when I felt invisible, that I was loved when I couldn't love myself, that someone stood by me when my own mind abandoned me. It isn't a title of possession, Maya. Her lips curved into a tender smile. It's a title of gratitude. Maya felt the words settle inside her, reshaping everything she thought she knew. She whispered, I'm sorry I laughed. Harold offered a kind smile. Laughter fades. Understanding lasts. And for the first time, Maya didn't feel like arguing. She felt like learning. Maya wiped her cheeks again, but the tears kept coming, not out of sadness now, but out of something heavier, deeper, harder to name. A mix of humility, awe, and a kind of grief for all she had misunderstood. Her voice came out small. Grandpa, Grandma, I feel like I've spent years fighting the wrong things. Harold leaned back slightly, studying her with gentle eyes. Not wrong things, sweetheart. Just incomplete things. Incomplete? She echoed. Yes, Evelyn said softly. You've been fighting shadows, not stories. Maya frowned, confused. Evelyn continued, squeezing her granddaughter's hand. You stand up for women, and that's good. That's noble. But strength isn't measured by how loudly we reject tradition, Maya. It's measured by how deeply we choose what is meaningful to us. Harold nodded. And meaning looks different for everyone. Maya let out a shaky breath. I thought anything old-fashioned was harmful. Evelyn smiled wistfully. Then you've forgotten that many old-fashioned things survived because they held love. Maya's heart twisted. She looked at Harold, at the wrinkles etched by decades of devotion, at the steady hands that had pulled Evelyn through more than she'd realized, at the soft reverence in his eyes every time he looked at his wife. And she looked at Evelyn, courageous, gentle, enduring, a woman who carried memory loss, recovery, and love with a grace far stronger than Maya's harshest outburst. Grandma, Maya whispered, voice trembling. Why didn't you ever tell me all this? Evelyn sighed. Because you weren't ready to hear it. Maya blinked. What do you mean? You saw the world in two colors, Evelyn said kindly. Oppression or freedom, weakness or strength, victim or survivor. But life, she smiled softly. Life is painted in full color, Maya. And you needed time to grow into someone who could see those shades. Harold added, and you're seeing them now. Maya's throat tightened. I feel embarrassed. Like I made everything about me and my beliefs instead of what you actually felt. Evelyn shook her head. Embarrassment is just the doorway to wisdom. Harold chuckled softly. I was far more stubborn than you at your age. You have nothing to be ashamed of. Maya finally managed a shaky laugh. I doubt that. No, Harold insisted warmly. You care deeply. That's why you fight so fiercely. Now you're learning to care wisely. Evelyn nodded. And wisdom makes your voice more powerful, not less. Maya felt something shift inside her, a softening, a breaking open, like a clenched fist finally releasing. So, she whispered, if my lady isn't disrespectful, what is it to you both? Harold looked at Evelyn with a tenderness so profound it made Maya's breath catch. It's a promise, he said quietly. Evelyn smiled through tears. And a memory. And a reminder, Harold added, that love can survive even the things the mind forgets. Maya pressed a hand to her heart. Grandpa, he continued, eyes never leaving Evelyn. When she couldn't remember who she was, she remembered she was loved. That was enough to bring her back. So yes, I call her my lady, because it honors the moment I almost lost her, and the miracle that I didn't. Evelyn brushed a tear from Harold's cheek with delicate fingers. And I call him my gentleman, because he rebuilt my world piece by piece. Maya's eyes stung again. I misjudged something beautiful. And now you understand something beautiful, Evelyn said softly. Harold leaned forward. Which means you've grown today more than you realize. Maya took a deep breath, letting warmth replace the shame in her chest. I want to learn from you both, not argue, not assume, just understand. Evelyn nodded proudly. Then let us tell you something else. Another piece you never knew. Maya's brows lifted with curiosity. Another piece? Harold smiled, a sad, tender smile that hinted at years of hidden struggle. Yes, because the story of my lady isn't finished. Evelyn took Harold's hand again, their fingers interlocking like puzzle pieces that had fit together for a lifetime. There was a night, Evelyn whispered, her voice trembling, when I forgot Harold's face entirely. Maya froze, breath caught in her lungs. And that, Harold said softly, was when I learned what love truly means. Maya leaned in, heart pounding, ready to hear the next truth, a truth deeper than any she had expected. A truth that would change everything all over again. Evelyn's confession hung in the air like a shiver. Maya leaned forward, breath held, every part of her bracing for a truth she somehow knew would hurt, but needed to hear. You forgot his face, she whispered. Evelyn nodded slowly. It was the worst night of my life. Harold's eyes softened, touched by old pain but also by the tenderness of remembering how far they had come. She woke up terrified, he murmured. Absolutely terrified. Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment, steadying herself before she continued. I opened my eyes and there was a man sitting beside me, a man crying, and I didn't know why. Harold swallowed hard. Even now, all these years later, the memory made his hands tremble. I said, "Who are you?" Evelyn whispered, voice cracking, and he looked at me like his whole world had turned to dust. Harold gently touched her cheek. I thought I'd lost her again. Not physically, but lost her heart. Lost her memory of us. Lost everything we'd built. Maya's chest tightened painfully. What happened next? She asked, her voice barely above a breath. Evelyn offered a fragile smile. He didn't panic. He didn't shout. He didn't break. She turned to Harold. He just held out his hand and said, "It's okay. We can meet again." Harold's eyes shimmered as he added softly, "I told her we could fall in love as many times as she needed." Maya felt something inside her collapse entirely. She pressed both hands over her mouth as tears streamed silently down her face. Grandpa wasn't a symbol of patriarchy. He wasn't old-fashioned. He wasn't limiting. He was choosing love, again and again, even when love forgot him. Evelyn continued, her voice raw. I touched his face, slowly, trying to remember. And I didn't, not right away. She looked at Maya, heartbreak and triumph mingling in her eyes. But I remembered the way he made me feel. Safe, warm, held, loved. Harold squeezed her hand. Memory came back later, but trust came back first. Maya sobbed quietly, overwhelmed. And that, Evelyn said gently, brushing Harold's knuckles with her thumb, is why he calls me my lady. Because I once lost everything about myself, except the feeling of being cherished. Harold nodded. And I call her that to remind us both that love brought her back when memory couldn't. The room was silent except for Maya's soft crying. She wasn't just emotional, she was undone. Finally, she looked at her grandparents with a clarity that felt like stepping into sunlight after years in a cave. I judged you, she whispered. I judged your love, your traditions, your words. I thought I knew everything, but I knew nothing. Evelyn shook her head softly. No, sweetheart. You just didn't know the story. Harold leaned forward, eyes warm but firm. Before you fight for a woman, Maya, make sure you aren't fighting against what gives her strength. Maya cried harder, burying her face in her hands. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Evelyn immediately stood, slowly, carefully, and moved around the table to sit beside her granddaughter. She wrapped her arms around Maya, holding her close the way she had when Maya was a little girl afraid of thunderstorms. My dear, she whispered, kissing the top of Maya's head. You don't need to apologize anymore. You need to grow from this. Harold nodded. And you are, right now. Maya leaned into her grandmother's embrace, trembling. I want to understand the world, but I think I forgot to understand the people in it. Evelyn brushed a tear from Maya's cheek. Understanding people is the beginning of understanding the world. Maya looked up at her grandparents, emotion pooling in her chest so intensely she could hardly breathe. Will you teach me your story? She whispered. All of it? Harold smiled, a warm, proud, forgiving smile. We will. Evelyn nodded. And you'll teach us yours. A small, shaky laugh escaped Maya's throat. I think mine is much shorter. For now, Evelyn teased softly. They all chuckled, a fragile but healing sound. And as Maya wiped her face, she felt something she hadn't felt since the conflict began. Peace. Not because the story was over, but because she had finally learned how to listen. And listening, truly listening, was the beginning of everything she had been fighting for all along. Dinner had long grown cold on the table, but no one cared. The real meal had been the stories shared, the truths uncovered, the pieces of a love Maya never knew existed. Fragile, powerful, survivor's love. Harold reached across the table and took Evelyn's hand once more. They looked at each other with the quiet familiarity of two people who had lived 1,000 lifetimes together. Some remembered, some rebuilt. Maya watched them with new eyes, her heart full, her worldview cracked open in the gentlest and most necessary way. When Harold finally spoke, his voice was soft, but carried the weight of everything she had learned. Do you know the last thing your grandmother forgot during her recovery? Maya wiped the last of her tears. What? Harold smiled. Fear. Evelyn chuckled, brushing a curl behind her ear. Because you held my hand through all of it. He nodded. I did, and she held mine long before that. Maya exhaled, something shifting inside her, something rooted in respect, not rebellion. I used to think romance was outdated, she admitted. I thought traditions were traps. I thought anything old was automatically harmful. She looked down, embarrassed. But now, I see that I was dismissing people's choices, their histories, their love. Evelyn nodded. Tradition can be a prison, yes, but it can also be a poem, if it's chosen. Harold added, and love isn't the enemy of freedom. The right love gives you more of it. Maya felt those words settle deep in her ribs like seeds planted in fresh soil. "I think," she whispered, voice trembling, "I've been fighting for women so hard that I forgot to ask what women actually want, what they choose, what gives them strength. I forced my beliefs on Grandma without ever knowing her story." Evelyn's eyes softened. "And now you do. And knowing someone's story changes everything, doesn't it?" "It does," Maya breathed. Harold leaned forward, elbows on the table like he was preparing to tell her something important. Something sacred. "Maya," he said, "you have fire, and fire can warm or destroy. Your job is learning when to do each." She nodded slowly. "I will," she whispered. "I promise." Evelyn touched her cheek. "Then you're already becoming the woman you're meant to be." Maya felt her throat close. "Grandma, Grandpa, I don't want to treat people like ideas anymore. I want to understand them. I want to listen first." Harold grinned. "Good. Listening is how you build bridges, not battles." Maya took a shaky breath, then smiled, the first genuine smile since the argument. "Grandpa?" "Yes, my dear?" "When you called Grandma, my lady, and I laughed." She swallowed. "Did it hurt you?" Harold paused, considering his words with the same patience he lived his life. "It didn't hurt me," he said. "It worried me." "Worried you?" Maya echoed. "Yes." He squeezed Evelyn's hand. "I worried that your generation might forget that some gestures aren't about control, but about devotion." Evelyn nodded. "And I worried that maybe you saw love only through the lens of struggle, not through the lens of choice." Maya's chest tightened. "I didn't know love could be like this, and I definitely didn't know your story." Harold smiled softly. "Then learn it, all of it, and let it make you wiser, not quieter." Maya leaned back, letting the warmth of the room sink into her. "Can I ask one more thing?" "Of course," Evelyn said. "What do you feel?" Maya asked. "When he calls you my lady?" Evelyn's smile was small but luminous. "I feel like my story matters," Harold added. "I feel like honoring the woman who saved me." Maya felt a tear fall again, not out of guilt this time, but out of reverence. She stood, walked around the table, and hugged them both. They held her tightly, protectively, lovingly, the way they always had, even when she didn't understand it. "I love you," she whispered. "We love you too," Evelyn murmured. "More than you know," Harold added. As Maya pulled back, her grandmother cupped her face gently. "Now you know why he calls me my lady." Maya nodded, eyes shining. "I'll never forget it." Harold winked. "Good. Memory can be tricky sometimes." They all laughed, a soft, healing sound that filled the room. Maya returned to her seat, her heart lighter, her mind open in a way it had never been before. She wasn't abandoning her convictions. She wasn't dimming her fire. She was refining it, understanding it, using it with purpose instead of impulse. And as the evening settled around them, she realized something profound. The phrase she had mocked, the gesture she had ridiculed, the tradition she had dismissed, had been built on a love deeper, stronger, and more resilient than any argument she had ever made. And now, finally, she understood it.